Section 6.4. So we're going to talk about factor by grouping. You're going to use factor by grouping in two situations. You will use it, spelled grouping wrong. You will use it when your polynomial has 4 terms or when you have a polynomial with 3 terms and the leading coefficient is not equal to 1. And we'll do examples of both of those. Alright, so let's start with the ones with 4 terms. Those are a little easier to understand at first. So the directions will simply say factor, and I might give you x cubed plus 2x squared plus 5x plus 10. Well, the first thing you would do is you would notice there are 4 terms. And then what you should try after that is you should always try taking out a greatest common factor. Unfortunately, there's no common factor here. Some people will try to say x is a common factor, but there's no x down here. So there's no common factor. That's always what I look for first. Now, I notice I have 4 pieces. When you have 4 pieces, you're going to factor by grouping. And the general idea is you group them in pairs. Like so. You look at your first group and you look for something in common. In the first group, what I see in common is I see an x squared. There's an x cubed here and an x squared there. So I factor out x squared. And then left over is x plus 2. And then in the second group, I notice that 5 is common. Left over is x plus 2. Now, if you have done it correctly, whatever is in those parentheses right there has to exactly match whatever is in those parentheses over there. Okay? If they do not match exactly, there's one of 2 possibilities. 1, you made a mistake. That's the most likely possibility. Or 2, factor by grouping doesn't work. There are times when factor by grouping does not work, but in this class, all the problems I'm going to give you, factor by grouping will work. Alright, so now what I want you to think about, instead of this being x plus 2, let's say this was x squared y plus 5y. So instead of the symbol x plus 2, let's just say I had the symbol y. And then I think you would pretty easily tell me that y is your common term. You get a y in each one, and left over would be an x squared plus 5. Well, it's really the same thing here. This is our common piece. It's common to both things on either side of this plus sign. So I write that down. I write down the x plus 2. And when I take the x plus 2 away, left over is x squared plus 5. So there's my answer. If you wanted to, you could do a quick FOIL, check, make sure you get back to what you started with. Alright, let me try another one of those, and then I'll give one for you to try. How about factor 15k cubed minus 10k squared plus 3k minus 2. Alright, once again, I see the word factor. Whenever I see the word factor, the very first thing I always look for is a common term. I don't see any common term. And so, I notice next there are 4 terms, which tells me I'm going to try factor by grouping. So I put the first 2 in a group, and I put the second 2 in a group. I look at my first 2, and I notice the greatest common factor is a 5k squared. Once I take out the 5k squared, left over is 3k minus 2. Second group, there's nothing in common. But that's okay, because I look at my thing with parentheses, and they match up absolutely perfectly. Alright, so I write down my parentheses, 3k minus 2, and then I write down what's left over. And what's left over would be 5k squared plus 1. And you got to remember that there's really a 1 right in front here. When we factored out the entire 3x plus 2, there's a 1 left over right there. That's a very common mistake people will make. They'll forget to write that plus 1 right there. All right, here's homework problem number 1 for you. Factor 2x cubed minus 4x squared plus 5x minus 10. All right. Now, the next thing you need to watch out for on these problems are minus signs. And let me show you what I mean by that. Let's say I were to give you factor 5a squared x plus 2a squared y minus 5bx minus 2by. Well, same thing. I look for a greatest common factor. There isn't one. So I factor by grouping. And I'm going to make a mistake here on purpose. So this is not going to be correct, because this is the mistake I'll see a lot of people make. I'm going to write down 5a squared x plus 2a squared y minus 5bx minus 2by. And again, that's wrong right there. And we'll see why in just a second here. I'm going to pull out my greatest common factor. My greatest common factor for the first group is a squared. And I'm left with 5x plus 2y. And in the second group, the greatest common factor is a b. And I'm left with 5x minus 2y. And right here at this point, I stop and I say to myself, I made a mistake. And the reason I know I made a mistake is those two things in the parentheses there do not match up perfectly. So again, there are only two chances here. Either I made a mistake or this problem doesn't factor by grouping. And again, I'm telling you that in this section, you made a mistake. All the problems will factor by grouping. All right, so now the question was, where was my mistake? My mistake was right in the very first step. If I put this minus sign here, which is what I should do, I need to change this sign right here. And the reason for that is, if I put this minus sign outside the parentheses, then we would have to distribute. So to get back to what I had, I would have to have a negative 5bx, and then this one would be a positive, so when I distribute this minus sign through, it's the negative that I started with. And that's probably the single biggest mistake people make on these problems. When you put the minus sign out here in front of these parentheses, whatever this sign is in the middle has to change. So now that I change that sign, and I make that a plus, now my parentheses do match up, and now I'm pretty sure I did it right. So I write down 5x plus 2y, and left over is a squared minus b. Alright, I will do one more of those, and then I'll give you some problems to try. Let's say 3ax minus 7ay minus 3b squared x plus 7b squared y. Again, I look for a common factor. I don't see one. I notice there are 4 terms, so I group them. 3ax minus 7ay minus, I'm putting the minus sign out front of these parentheses. When I put the minus sign out front of these parentheses, that sign has to change. And that's the big thing you need to remember with minus signs there. So I have 3b squared x minus 7b squared y inside my parentheses. Alright, greatest common factor for the first group is an a. 3x minus 7y. Greatest common factor for the second group is a b squared. 3x minus 7y. And again, here is your little built-in self-check. These have to be exactly the same. If you screw up that minus sign, these are not going to be exactly the same. If these are not exactly the same, you got to go back and fix it. Take out my common term, 3x minus 7y, and then a minus b squared. Alright, homework problem number 2 for you. Factor 6x cubed plus 9x squared minus 2x minus 3. And problem number 3, factor ax minus 5ay minus 3bx plus 15by. Alright, so that concludes how to factor when you have 4 terms. Practice that, and then come back and watch the second half of the video for this section to learn how to factor trinomials.